Hello, everyone, and welcome to our live question and answer session with Criterion Edge President, Laurie Mitchell. My name is Jessica Sinha, and I'm the Marketing and Human Resources Manager here, and I will be moderating today's session, which is a follow-up to our last webinar, How to Assess Your CER for MDR Readiness, Part 1. Before we get started, I see a lot of us are still joining in, so if you guys have any technical difficulties in the duration of the session, please click on the chat option on your Zoom menu bar, and we'll try to help you out. We are recording the session, so it will be available afterwards. So a few weeks back, our president, Laurie, did a first of a two-part series webinar on assessing your CER for MDR compliance. Here's a quick overview of the things that we went through. Laurie specifically outlined the need for organization, structure, and language, and also highlighted ways to assess and resolve gaps in the areas of the state-of-the-art, safety and performance criteria, equivalence, and systematic literature review. We had so many questions and we couldn't get to all of them, unfortunately, due to the lack of time. So Laurie is hosting this special session just so we can run through some of your previous questions as well as make time for a couple of new ones. On the slide is also a quick link to the last webinar's recording. If you guys need a refresher, this link and all other links to our past webinar recordings can be found on our resources page of our website. At this point, if you haven't already, please get started and submit your questions using the Q&A option, not the chat option, please. Please use the Q&A option on the Zoom menu bar. A quick disclaimer before we begin. The information presented in this webinar is based upon our experience writing many MedDev 2.7/1 Rev 4 and MDR compliant CERs for notified body review. The opinions, tips, and best practices presented here are our interpretation and do not represent opinions or decisions that may be made by a notified body. The information is conceptual as each clinical evaluation process is unique to the subject device. We hope you find this information useful and applicable to your own internal processes. All right, while I take a moment to get our screen set up to show questions, Laurie, would you like to say a few words?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Jessica. And welcome, everyone. We're excited to get together in this way to review and discuss your questions regarding the CER. For a refresher, our part 1 of our two-part series was held on June 4th, and the particular sections or topics surrounding the CER that were discussed at that webinar were the state-of-the-art section, safety and performance outcomes and acceptance criteria, equivalence, and systematic literature review. So our questions will be centered primarily around those topics. We do have a part 2, and Jessica will tell you a little bit more about that later in the presentation. We do have a second part of our two-part series coming up in about a month, in which we'll discuss other sections of the CER. But today you'll find us focusing primarily on these first 4 that we discussed. So thank you again, Jessica, and we can get started.
Thanks, Laurie. You guys will see a quick poll launch on your screens at this point in time. We'd love to get a feel for what our audience is like. So if you don't mind, please take a couple of seconds and answer our poll question. It'll give us an idea of what is the makeup of our audience. So thank you, guys. Wait, just giving you a few more moments to finish answering. Okay, we have a very interesting mix of people with us today. Great, thank you guys. So without any further ado, let's dive right into our first question. Laurie, are you able to see the screen with the first question now?
I am, thank you.
Okay, our first question is, would you recommend using clinical data from systematic reviews and meta-analyses to support the safety and performance of the subject device?
Well, that's a good question, and it's a little bit of a trick question. Not for supporting the safety and performance of the subject device, primarily because the answer is because of that last clause. Systematic reviews and meta-analyses are commonly pooled data, or they're not the primary source of data. And certainly if it represents pooled data, that means that data within those meta-analyses or reviews is a mix. And you must use, to support the safety and performance of your own device, you must use data directly on that device and not mixed with anything else. The systematic reviews and meta-analyses are useful for the competitive landscape. Pooled data is very useful for establishing safety and performance and acceptance criteria from pooled data, but not for the subject device.
Great, thanks, Laurie. We have our next question up on the screen. Do you compare warnings and precautions as part of clinical equivalence? Excuse me.
Clinical equivalence, yes. The answer is we have not ever done that. In our experience, we do not. We've written many CERs, and what we do use for the clinical comparison part of doing the equivalence, with the criteria that we use there is we usually compare the clinical condition of the equivalent comparator and the subject devices, intended purpose, site in the body, patient population, contraindications, and duration of use. But we don't, we've never used comparing warnings or precautions.
Okay, thanks, Laurie. Our next question up on the screen is, can you give an example of a safety performance objective and corresponding acceptance criteria?
This is a question certainly left over from our our first webinar on June 4th. And there were many questions about this or this topic. So I thought I would prepare some notes here to give you an example of this, because this seems to be a very hot topic, safety and performance outcomes and the acceptance criteria. So I'm going to use a device. I know that everyone on this call comes from many different backgrounds and many different types of medical devices, but I'm going to use a coronary device. And let's take for an example a fictional coronary dilatation catheter, a CDC. That is what we will then look at for safety and performance objectives. Normally that's reported in the data, the clinical data in published literature, is, for example, safety objectives could be rates of vessel perforation, rates of vessel dissection, rates of MI, peri-procedural MI, and in your rates of peri-procedural arrhythmias. That would be some safety, potential safety criteria. Performance is usually bundled into a general bucket in which we have called it, for example, in one of the CERs we wrote, we called it CDC performance, which was defined as a reported technical or overall procedure success. So be thinking about procedural success. We all know, I use coronary dilatation catheters for a reason, is that there aren't very many clinical trials written specifically with that, using that data. You know, we don't do trials on guide wires or catheters, and I think many of you come from other backgrounds in areas in which your medical devices don't necessarily have direct clinical investigation data related to them. So how then do you measure the safety and performance of your device lacking its own RCT data or published data directly on your device? One of the ways to do that is to, if it's involved in a procedure, is to look at procedural success rates as a measure of performance. So in the case of the CDC, that performance criteria can be defined as overall procedural success, such as successful delivery of the catheter, its ability to inflate and deflate, improvement of the minimal luminal diameter. So you define the performance criteria that you're seeing in the literature. And I'll just I'll just end my comments here with saying one thing that's very important about your safety and performance objectives and the acceptance criteria. You should design them around the data that you intend to collect or have been collecting, and they must be related to the indication. For example, if this is a brand new device of yours, you don't have post-market data on it yet, what do you intend to collect as data in the post-market environment? And those data will be used, those performance and safety criteria will then be used to continually assess the safety and performance of your device in going forward after it's been marketed. So that is one thing. And then don't collect data on an indication, for example, that is not a part of the indication of your device. For example, in the case of the coronary dilatation catheter, you wouldn't want to collect data or display data when that CDC is used in the periphery, like in an off-label use. So just be clear about setting your safety and performance criteria up that relate directly to your device, relates to its indication, and matches or mimics the data that you're actually collecting on your own device. I hope that helps. This could be a whole webinar in and of itself, really, as the safety and performance objectives and acceptance criteria. But I hope that gives you something to think about.
Thanks, Laurie. Here's our next question. Can case studies be included anywhere in the CER, or should they just be excluded?
Case studies can be used. They are a lower level of evidence, so you wouldn't use them preferentially over a higher level of evidence, such as prospective or retrospective studies or RCT trials or those type of data. However, this goes a little bit with what I just talked about, which are devices that don't have their own published literature. They're a part of a system or a part of a procedure. But in those cases, you may find useful data in case studies relating directly to your device and its procedure. For example, if you read a case study for a guide wire, a coronary guide wire again, and that case study references that your coronary guide wire was used in that procedure, and that case study also says the procedure was successful, then you can extrapolate that conclusion as data. It is a low level of evidence, but it is still direct evidence about how your device performed during a procedure, an on-label use procedure.
Okay, thanks, Laurie. Our next question here is, so if my device is not state-of-the-art, I can't do a CER? Most of our devices are generic medical devices, such as surgical instruments.
We also get this question quite a bit is how do we approach, the general question is, how do we approach a CER if our device is generic, legacy, been on the market 30 years. In the case of guide wires, nobody ever writes about them. They're all sort of part of that same grouping. How do we tackle CERs like this? And you know, one of the examples that I just gave was, you know, look for procedural success and safety using case studies. But let's get to the first part of this question, which is, so if my device is not state of the art, I cannot do a CER. So that's not being state of the art is not equal to being generic. Generic devices such as clamps or rib spreaders or something like that, something you would use in a surgical instrument, can be the state-of-the-art standard for the industry. It doesn't have to be sexy, and it can have been on the market for a long time. But is there anything better than that? Then maybe not. Maybe that is the state of the art. So that's the question. If if you're struggling with your devices, where does your device fit in the state-of-the-art continuum? You have to, at the end of the day, compare your device to others on the market like yours. And that for your device, in the level of state-of-the-art in which your device exists, there may be better clamps out there, maybe better rib spreaders out there, but there may be a whole layer of rib spreaders exactly like yours that are used. So you compare apples to apples. You compare your device to other devices like it, not to the best rib spreader out there that uses completely different technology. You compare like to like. And yes, you do have to, to answer the question, yes, you do have to do a CER.
Thanks, Laurie. Our next question here up on the screen, it is, where in the CER should off-label literature be and how should it be addressed?
So off-label, this is an excellent question because people don't often wonder about what they do with off-label literature, off-label data. Really what it is off-label data relating to off-label use of your device. And we're not regulatory strategists, so we can't tell you what to do about that. But many of our clients, when we are screening the published literature, we are told not to, and we agree with this methodology, do not reject the data because it is used in an off-label manner. Your device is used in an off-label manner. It is useful and important in the CER to note how your device is used in an off-label way, if it is at all, and what does that look like? Do we separate it and make a separate subsection saying off-label use of the device in the clinical literature section? Yes, we do. And we make it very clear that the data surrounding this off-label use isn't used to establish the safety and performance of the device. But off-label use does have a place in the CER as long as you're very clear that it is off-label, what it was used for, and you describe it and present that data.
Okay, thanks, Laurie. Here's our next question on the screen. Shall we take risk management files of the subject device into consideration when defining the safety and performance measures acceptance criteria?
Should we take the risk management files of the subject device into consideration when defining the S&P measures? I'm not sure exactly what we're going for here. Let me just answer maybe a slightly different way. When we are doing the clinical literature screening, and we find during the course of screening clinical literature an AE or some use that might not be part of the IFU or needs to be looped back into the risk management quality system within the company as possibly a new use or an off-label use, we do that as part of our screening of the device. So if there's any new information discovered during clinical literature screening, it is looped back to the risk management department of our clients so that they can assess and possibly update their risk management profile of the device prior to the completion of the CER so that we can put that new information into the CER. I think that's an important point to make that some clients are not clear on, that they don't necessarily demonstrate that their risk management documentation is updated as a part of the evaluation, if necessary, as a part of the evaluation of the device, the clinical evaluation process. Do we take that then into consideration when defining the safety and performance measures and acceptance criteria? I think my earlier question tried to get at that the S&P outcomes are based primarily upon the indication and the data that you're collecting and the data that are found in the clinical literature. So that's the vessel perforation rates and so forth, you know, MI and arrhythmias and so forth. So of the example we gave earlier. So I hope that answer, it was a long, rambly answer, but I'm not really sure that we take risk management files into consideration when we're establishing S&P criteria, S&P outcomes.
All right. Here's a question relating to the state of the art. What about updating the state of the art in CERs of devices that go way back, example, guiding catheters? Should the state of the art be renewed entirely? How would you suggest to execute the state of the art search strategy?
Your CER should, whatever the cadence of your CER is, whether it's annual or every 2 years, for example, each time the state of the art should be updated to look for any new professional guidelines or any new information out there that would lend further information or clarity on the state of the art. So I get that the updating the CER for devices that go way back, guiding catheters, yes, we're on that topic. But yes, the state of the art should be updated. Now, should the state of the art be renewed entirely? Well, that depends on if the prior state of the art is MedDev Rev 4 compliant and even MDR compliant. We Criterion Edge, we often update state-of-the-art sections from scratch, from previous CERs, because they're inadequate. They do not align with MDR compliance, and they certainly do not align with MedDev Rev 4. So be careful about just updating a state-of-the-art. Look first to see if it meets the needs of the CER. In our opinion, and this is what I said in my previous webinar, the state-of-the-art section is the most important section in the CER. It is where you establish your device within its own state-of-the-art level, and you document why it is state-of-the-art at that level that it exists with the competitors. And it is most importantly, the state-of-the-art then goes into defining and presenting the safety and performance outcomes, and by gleaning acceptance criteria from competitor or pooled devices, pooled data and devices. So your state-of-the-art, at the end of the state-of-the-art, you have established the safety and performance criteria and the acceptance criteria that you will use throughout the rest of your CER to compare your own device's data to. So the state-of-the-art, it needs a very thorough look at, not just an update, usually.
Okay. Our next question is up on the screen. Can we use an internal device that is already CE marked under MDD as an equivalence device for any new product?
You can use your internal device, which is great, and the fact that it's CE marked is also great, as an equivalence device for any product in which you can establish equivalence with. So it obviously can't be with any new product. It would have to be for a product in which perhaps that equivalent comparator is a predicate device too, or that you feel that by doing a gap analysis on the equivalence between the two devices, you being the company can establish that the two devices are equivalent. And that's an exercise that you should also be very careful with, because equivalence has changed a great deal in the last couple of years under the upcoming MDR requirements and certainly MedDev Rev 4. And it is a point-by-point clinical, technical, and biological attributes that must be directly compared, and any change between one or the other must be explained and justified that it has no clinical impact or what the clinical impact may be. It was all great until the last part of that question. The last part of the question is just for any new product. Obviously not any new product.
All right. Our next question is it possible to use the data from state-of-the-art search in the literature as clinical data for our device under clinical evaluation in CER?
I'm gonna go out on a limb and say the short answer to that question is no, because the state-of-the-art specifically is looking at competitor data. It's looking for the state-of-the-art landscape, the therapeutic landscape, the competitor device or devices data. That's why you can use pooled data, meta-analyses, systematic reviews, even in which your own device may be a part of those systematic reviews or pooled data. But the point is that it's not data purely on your own device under evaluation. So no, state-of-the-art data that's used to establish safety and performance acceptance criteria, ranges, upper and lower bounds, must be not your own clinical device data alone. It must be from competitors or pooled or mixed data or from systematic reviews.
Okay. The next question is, can I base my state-of-the-art on existing free reviews only that I find on PubMed, or excuse me, should I find a way to get my hands on non-free articles? Since it is state-of-the-art, can I just review material from the past 2 years?
So the state-of-the-art, can I base my state-of-the-art on existing free reviews only that I find on PubMed? All right. So again, the state-of-the-art is that you are doing the searches that you do for state-of-the-art. There's usually a couple, and these are, I would not recommend internet searches, which is what I think at the heart of this question is finding on PubMed or for free. I wouldn't recommend doing an internet search only. The notified bodies are looking very, very carefully at literature search methodology, not only for your own device under evaluation, most certainly there, but also for your state-of-the-art. Where are you looking? What are you looking at? How are you identifying that competitor, therapeutic landscape, competitor data? What does it look like? How are you presenting it? So be careful. The state-of-the-art is not a quick search on PubMed to find a few articles to cobble together a state-of-the-art section. It needs to be rigorous, and the two searches that we commonly run to support the state-of-the-art is a PICO search, patient indication, clinical conditions and outcomes. In other words, you're looking for, and we always run our searches through Embase and Medline, minimally. And then from that, we're looking at that PICO search and the outcomes from that. And we're also looking at, we're searching for competitor devices by their names. We ask our clients for a top 5 list of your top 5 competitors for your particular device so that we can begin to look for data on those devices. And then thirdly, we do a gray literature search. That's a gray literature search is on the internet, because now you're looking for unpublished data, professional guidelines, websites. The state-of-the-art needs to show that you have researched and are displaying current professional guidelines, practice guidelines, and so forth by looking at relevant websites for that. So since it is the second question, since it's state-of-the-art, can I just review material from the past 2 years? That may not be adequate for the kind of device that you have, which may go back several years. And if you're just confining your search to a couple of years, you may miss important information that might be a bit older than that, that you should employ in your state-of-the-art discussion and analysis.
Thanks, Laurie. Before we go on to the next one, I want to just make a quick reminder. You guys can use the Q&A option on your Zoom menu bar to submit your questions. We want to make sure you can get to as many as possible. All right, our next question up on the screen is, for devices in groups that do have common specifications, how important are they in a CER, and how do you best leverage the CSs for a successful CER apart from all the other required information?
So I'm going to admit that I don't know what common specifications are. I don't know that term. For devices in groups that have common specifications, the fact that it's capitalized makes me think it's a thing rather than just a reference to their common, the commonality characteristics, clinical, technical, and biological. How important are they in a CER, and how do you best leverage the CSs for a successful CER? I've got to say, folks, I really know how to answer this question. I'm gonna politely take a pass on it because I'm not sure I would answer it correctly.
Okay, no worries, Laurie. We'll move on to the next one. The next question on the screen: when you have identified a data gap, how do you go about deciding how to satisfy this? When is a survey acceptable, and what do you do if the survey is not an option?
So I hope this means that during the lead up to a CER, not while you're writing a CER, because if you're identifying a data gap for an important part of your indication or patient population or therapeutic area, wherever the data gap may be, and you're already writing your CER, you might have trouble. Depends on how large the gap is or how you can perhaps mitigate that. How do you go about deciding how to satisfy this? If we're talking about proactive, how do you go about satisfying this in the future, then that does sound certainly like PMCF data. And we certainly have used data from surveys, user surveys, and other such surveys. So how do you go about deciding on how to satisfy this? Well, that would be a part of your PMCF plan. And going forward, which right now in MDD, even in MDD, we're writing about the PMCF plan. And even in MDR, you may not have any proactive processes in place yet to collect PMCF data. But as long as you demonstrate that you have a plan and intend to launch that, from our experience, notified bodies are right now okay with that. In other words, how do you go about deciding to satisfy this? Well, you tell the notified bodies how you're going to, that you've identified a gap and how you're going to mitigate that gap going forward. And yes, a survey is one way of doing that.
Okay, thanks, Laurie. The next question up is, when updating a CER post-approval with new search data, how do you delineate between the new searches covering the latest time period, annual in our case, with the old search outputs?
That's a great question, and a challenge, I would say, is that we certainly it's almost always the case, unless we're writing a de novo CER for the very first time, that when we're asked by a client to update a previous CER, one of the most common challenges is bridging a new clinical literature search with results from an older clinical literature search. For example, if the old clinical literature search in the previous CER was from 2015 to 2018, let's just say, and here it is in 2020, and and it's a new world, and methodology and clinical literature methodology is much more stringent and must be much more robust. and perhaps the old methodology in the previous CER was less than robust, or not published at all, or we really don't know even what was done, our recommendation often is to start from scratch. It's cleaner to do a search back to 2015 to today, rather than trying to make apples match oranges. That can sometimes be a tough thing to do using the old methodology, which is probably flawed, with new MDR MedDev Rev 4 ready methodology. If that's not the case, and we're just simply updating last year's CER, and its methodology was very good, we will do just a bridge search using the same methodology, the same search terms, and it might only be a year. And we'll use the old results, present them in the CER along with the new results, the included articles and included clinical data, and analyze that all together. You do have to do a total analysis, taking into consideration not only the old data I use with quotes, plus the new data that you just gleaned on a bridge search.
All righty, we do have a little bit more time, so I want to just send another quick reminder. Please continue to send your questions in the Q&A, and we'll be sure to ask them. So our next question is a little bit long, so I'll read it out. When establishing equivalence, the MDR indicates that the manufacturer is supposed to have agreements in place with the manufacturer of the equivalent device and access to reports data. How have you handled this, especially since getting an agreement between competitors to share data will never happen?
Well, it's a long question with a very short answer. In all of the CERs that we've written for many manufacturers, we have never handled it. In other words, in these last 4 years that Criterion Edge has been in existence and working with large and small manufacturers globally, we have not encountered one time in which we have used an equivalent under MedDev Rev 4, where we have used another manufacturer's device as the equivalent comparator. I don't know what that tells the audience. I think most folks are hoping they can still use a competitor, equivalent comparator, but unless that's very locked down in our experience and what we understand, because again, we don't have any experience with it. We've never done it. But it's our understanding with our clients that it's almost impossible to get those kinds of agreements. So that's my short answer to that, is that we just don't have any experience with that because we've never seen it happen.
Okay, thanks, Laurie. Here's a question on literature searches. How many literature databases do you normally use for your literature searches, and which ones would you recommend most?
MedDev Rev 4 actually gives a shout out to Embase and Medline. And there is guidance or suggestions in MedDev Rev 4 about the use of databases, and I think that's where much of the methodology used for systematic literature review is outlined in MedDev Rev 4. Criterion Edge, we have a team of literature reviewers, screeners, and led by a medical librarian. And we use a platform called ProQuest Dialogue, which gives us access to virtually every database in existence, but primarily our searches are run in Embase and Medline. If the client asks for additional searches in perhaps some very specialized databases, we can certainly do that through our access on ProQuest Dialogue. Then we take those search results, and our screening is done, and so forth. Our screening and review is done using Distiller, which is a great platform and product manufactured or developed by evidence partners. So we use two, and Embase and Medline are the ones that we always primarily use. And that's straight out of MedDev Rev 4.
All right, we have a couple more minutes left, so we can maybe squeeze in 2 or 3 more questions. The MDR, excuse me, let me make sure you can see it first. The MDR suggests you need to address all outstanding unmitigated risks identified in your risk management process in your CER to see if you need to do a clinical trial. For a new device, how do you address this?
That might be more of a question of regulatory strategy within your own internal company, but outstanding unmitigated risks identified in your risk management process to CER, see if you need to do a clinical trial. For new devices, how do you address this? I believe I would assume that if you have a new device, that there has been clinical trial conducted on it, and that you have those data to use as, you know, justification of safety and performance, and certainly to identify risk that comes out of clinical trial data. If it's a new device in which you're using a predicate device as an equivalent comparator, you would then need to establish that the equivalent comparator, which is post-market, is a part of your risk management quality system, and that those unmitigated risks are identified and updated on an ongoing fashion. So I hope that answered the question as best I can. I'm not a risk person. We certainly deal with the risk data, and we know what our role is as clinical evaluators in the whole risk process.
Okay, thanks, Laurie. Next one here is, would it be acceptable to refer to the old revision, excuse me, of the CER for the previous search and analysis instead of including it in the new version?
I think we talked about this in a couple of other previous questions. I think the nature of this question is acceptable to refer to, in other words, point to. When I hear refer to, I interpret that to mean that in the current CER, the CER that you're revving for either MedDev Rev 4 or MDD or MDR, that the person asking this question is saying, can you basically point to the old version of the CER, say, the CER XYZ dated blah, blah, 2018 for our analysis of the previous literature and data included in that CER, and here's our new CER here's our new data from 2019 and 2020, and we're going to talk about that in this CER. That is not an approach we've ever used or seen used. In one of my previous answers, I think I talked about just a few minutes ago, is that all data needs to be included in the CER that you're currently writing, and those data need to be analyzed in aggregate with each other, and that analysis needs to be a standalone analysis. It can't be, we analyze this back here and now we're analyzing this and draw your own conclusions. You have to put all your data together during the time range of your CER and analyze that based upon safety and performance criteria and acceptance criteria. One of our excuse me, one of our maxims is that we learned very early on in this business is that the notified body doesn't want to go to 5 other documents to look at data or analyses. It doesn't mind pulling source documents such as your IFU or maybe some of your risk management SOPs or processes, but as far as data and analysis, it wants it housed in the current CER that that person is reading. They're very tired. They read a lot of CERs all day. You want to tell the story in your CER, and it needs to be a total story, and you need to tell it clearly and completely. Like I like to say, you start at the beginning, go to the middle, and then get to the end and stop. And you need to repeat yourself probably many times in your CER because those reviewers are tired. And I'll just stop and just say this. This is a little bit of a, I'll just expound a little bit on this. When we're writing, we tell the reviewer, the reader, what we just told them, which is, in case you didn't miss it in the equivalence, those two devices are equivalent, and they are equivalent with this, they're equivalent with that, and at the very end you say it again. Everything is equivalent. If you find yourself saying something 5 times, that's okay. Drawing a conclusion 5 times, because they might have missed 4 of the other times. And while they're skimming through, it's okay to say at the very end of your equivalence section, for example, and by the way, we have met the equivalence written above. So that's all I'll say about that. I hope that was helpful.
Thanks, Laurie. Before we close out, I want to just push in this one last question we have here. It's a little bit lengthy, so I'll read it. For a highly innovative device where there is no state-of-the-art yet available, what type of evidence is required for the CER, and how to best approach this process? Would a pre-market clinical study always be required, or would it suffice with PMCF-study?
So let's unpack that. For a highly innovative device, such as, say, a breakthrough device or with breakthrough technology or something like that, where there may be few or no direct competitors. First of all, in the state-of-the-art, approaching the state-of-the-art with a device like this means that you still need to take the current technology that does exist, that your device is even though it's innovative, it still has built upon data and technology that exists. So you build from that platform and you say how your device is different from more common technology that may exist and how you've improved on it or what the improvements or changes are. So that's how you approach the state-of-the-art, roughly speaking. What type of evidence is required for the CER and how best to approach the process. So that now I think we're talking about what type of evidence is required for the clinical evaluation of the subject device and how to best approach this process. Well, I can't tell if this device is pre-market or post-market. If it is pre-market, their PMCF is not applicable because it's not post-market yet. If this device, this highly innovative device, is post-market, then you certainly have PMS data that you are passively collecting, but you would need to most definitely come up with a robust PMCF plan to demonstrate how you're going to proactively collect post-market clinical data in the in follow-up. So what is the best approach? What type of evidence is required for the CER for your highly innovative device? If it's post-market, then you would use the usual clinical data sources, any clinical literature that's been written about it, any clinical investigations that were done on it or are ongoing, any PMCF data you may have on it, and any PMS data that you have passively collected as part of your PMS activities. If that highly innovative device is pre-market, you don't have PMS data, you don't have PMCF data, and you will need to mine any kind of clinical investigations or other investigations that were done on that device directly to establish its safety and performance.
Thanks, Laurie, and thank you everyone for all your participation and all the questions that you've asked. Before we close out, I want to quickly just run another poll to get a feel for where you guys are in your internal processes. If you wouldn't mind, before you log out, just take a couple seconds to answer that question for us. And if we didn't get to your question today, I know we had a few really good questions, we'll be sure to reach out to you afterwards. And if you have more questions, you think of more later, you're welcome to reach out to us again at our email, consult@criterionedge.com. As a reminder, the session is recorded and will be available afterwards on our website, and you'll also get an email about that as well. If you found this webinar useful, and also our last one, if you were able to attend that, we are continuing this series on how to assess your CER for MDR Readiness Part 2, and that's going to be on Wednesday, July 8th at 11 a.m. Pacific time. So please be on the lookout for that email from us with more details on how to register for that. We look forward to seeing you guys there as well. Thank you again for everyone for your participation, and thanks, Laurie.
Yeah, thank you everybody for your questions. Some of these questions are tough, and we appreciate you weighing in with your questions. Thanks so much.
Thank you.